Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting while teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, owner and operator of New You Nutrition Counseling. And with my practice, we do exactly that. We help you break free from the clutches of diet culture, unlearn basically everything you've probably ever learned about nutrition and your body, and help guide you towards true food freedom and overall wellness. So, if that is something that you are interested in, definitely listen in to today's topic. But I also encourage you to head on over to our website. It is New You Nutrition, which is nunutrition.com. I will link it in the show notes below. Don't worry. But check out our free resources page. All of the information about one-on-one counseling is on there. And if it's something that you think, well, maybe this is something I'm interested in, but I'm not sure, no worries. We have a free opportunity for you. We have a 15-minute discovery call, which is basically just we sit down for 15 minutes over Zoom and you tell me kind of what your struggles are, what your goals are, and kind of maybe anything that you've tried or, in the past that's worked or hasn't worked so well for you. And basically, we just determine, okay, is this a good fit? Is this something that, our practice can really help you with? And is this something that, do your goals kind of align with things that is within our scope of practice, and if so, then we kind of get you ready to roll on the one-on-one counseling. If one-on-one counseling financially is just not an option for you right now, then we have lots of other opportunities with digital courses, lots of downloadable freebies and things like that too. So I can certainly talk you through all of that. All of that is also available on that free resources tab. So again, go head to the website, check it out. If you follow me on social media, it's linked in my bio. So definitely hope to see you all there. And of course, if you have any questions, there's just like a general contact form as well. You can also send me a direct message on any of my social media platforms, or leave me a comment below if you're okay with the the general public seeing it. We would love to hear from you as well. So with all of that out of the way, I come to you today with a topic that I feel like kind of resurfaces every, 2 to 3 years. And I find myself kind of, doing a little bit more extensive content about it. It'll probably be a little bit of a shorter one just because there's not a whole lot to update. But that is apple cider vinegar. So apple cider vinegar is just a vinegar. It's used, kind of traditionally in cooking. It's basically you take apple juice, add a certain type of bacteria to it, and that bacteria ferments it into a vinegar-like product, which then you can use to add flavoring to all kinds of cooking. In terms of, is it delicious? Yeah, when you cook it, I like to use it on like my greens or kale, even like Brussels sprouts. Sometimes like I'll finish them a little bit in it. It actually can add kind of a nice little like brininess to cut like soups and stews and things that are kind of heavy. But you're probably, most of you are like, yeah, that's great, but like, what about the health benefits, right? Because it has kind of become this like poster child of a supplement that, is supposed to kind of work miracles on all kinds of health fronts. So I get lots of questions about it very often. And, every now and then I kind of just, dig back into the research and see if anything has kind of changed, and then kind of project that research on to you all. So the claims that I have heard and seen from apple cider vinegar is that it helps with and this is kind of, taking it intentionally every day as a supplement. That can be a supplement either as like, you're just taking a set amount, like drinking a set amount of vinegar, or now there are lots of over-the-counter supplements that are either in like capsules or gummies or things like that, that are supposed to kind of mimic those effects. You're kind of theoretically getting the same dose of apple cider vinegar. You just don't have to drink vinegar, which is not not particularly pleasant. There are all kinds of health claims out there about apple cider vinegar, everything from diabetes management to weight loss to lowering your cholesterol, lots and lots of GI claims. So things like, helping with acid reflux or, bowel regularity, things of that nature. So I just wanted to kind of spend a little bit of time today kind of telling you, real deal, what the research shows, and then kind of obviously, you are allowed to make your own decisions about what to do with your own body. I'm just here to provide you the research and tell you what it says. So first, I want to kind of talk about, what I am defining as research. So, if you go to Google and just like, type in apple cider vinegar, you will come up with easily thousands of, research articles about, and I said research in air quotes to anybody who's just listening and not physically watching me. So you will come up with a lot of research articles about apple cider vinegar. Most of those are lay articles. So that means that they are written by people who are not scientists, people who basically are doing freelance writing. They're writers for a living. So they don't have any background in science. They don't have any background in health. They really don't know anything about apple cider vinegar other than kind of a few key headlines that they have Googled themselves. So I don't give much credit or much stock to any of those types of things. Even like kind of major news outlets like MSNBC, CNN, Fox, things like that, they get it wrong. They just misinterpret the data because they don't understand how to read it. And that's unfortunate, but it's the way that it is. A lot of times they will bring in specialists. So they will bring in dietitians or doctors and interview them and ask them for their opinions. And if that's kind of how the article is written, then I think it is a little bit more valid, because people like myself who are clinicians, we are trained to understand how to read the actual research, the primary research. And if you're interested in kind of learning a little bit more about kind of, what is primary research versus secondary research, for example, I actually did a whole podcast episode on that a couple of months ago. I will link it in the show notes below, so you don't have to go, searching through the whole page to find it. But just very briefly, what I'm considering research is a primary research study, which means it was done by an institution or an organization that was funded by the National Institutes of Health. So it was funded by a collective of doctors and health professionals. And it was published in a scientific journal. So that means that it had to be peer reviewed. And I have particularly high standards. So even of those kind of, real research studies that, are funded by governmental agencies that are, they're peer reviewed and kind of have to be validated, and they're checked. What peer reviewed means is just basically that a group of other scientists kind of looked over your data and pointed out if anything seemed to be missing or if you're kind of overdrawing conclusions or things like that. They really kind of challenge you and make you kind of stand up for what you did, and assuming that you're able to kind of back your facts, then the study gets published. If you can't, then you either have to go back and kind of do a couple more studies to kind of clarify some of your results, or change your wording to be like, well, we found this, but we didn't account for that. So kind of, take that with a grain of salt type of thing. Anyway, so I could talk about research all day, unless in case you guys can't tell. But anyway, so I only look at primary research articles that are peer reviewed. And even at that, I kind of take it a step further, because there's lots of research out there that is done in cell models and done in animal models, which is great. Those are very necessary studies. The things that you can do to rats, you cannot do to humans, right? It's a lot of times not ethical. You have much more control over those types of studies. But I think it is really important to note that those studies don't always translate to the human condition. And very often we see that. And honestly, apple cider vinegar is kind of a prime example to where you see the data coming out of these animal studies. You're like, wow, this looks so promising. But then when we do it in humans, we just do not see the same effects. And it's not that humans are that much more complex than rats. Actually, we're really not, but we live more complex lives, right? The rats in studies like that are typically, they all live in the same house, they all are fed the same food, they have the same amount, they're exposed to the same temperature, they have roughly the same amount of stress, they have the same amount of light and dark within a day, the same amount of activity. All of those things are standardized in rats, but we can't standardize those things in humans. So that's why a lot of times when you see these studies that look super, super promising in animals, I still pump the brakes. I'm like, until I see it work in humans, I don't believe it. And until I see it work in a lot of humans, I don't believe it. A lot of times, particularly supplement companies are bad for this. They will do a trial, but they won't have a control group, and they won't have a and they won't have a very large number of participants. So the number of participants, obviously, the larger the clinical trial, the more power it has, right? So the more people that you can kind of show this effect across, if you do a research study with 10 people and, 6 of them, show an effect and the other 5 don't, well, like that's not really helpful. Like, yes, it's a majority, but is it really clinically meaningful? Probably not. Whereas if you have a research study with 10,000 people, right, and 8,000 of them show one effect and the only 2,000 don't, it's still pretty meaningful. So just small nuances like that. Again, I don't want to get too heavy into it in this episode, but there is a whole other episode kind of about the importance of kind of paying attention to where your research is coming from and what constitutes a good clinical trial, and what is meaningful data when we think about health outcomes, particularly in the context of supplements, which is what we're talking about here. So kind of what all have we looked at apple cider vinegar for? So probably the widest studied is diabetes management. It kind of fell in on the coattails of the cinnamon era of kind of, oh, we'll do like cinnamon supplements for blood sugar management, and just kind of like, what about apple cider vinegar? That's something we could do. It has probably the most human studies that I have seen. I found about, it's kind of hard to pinpoint because if you get different results with different search engines. So I found anywhere from like 9 to 10 or so kind of pretty robust human trials. That said, all of those trials had pretty small number of participants. Now that is not uncommon in kind of early stage trials. So these were done a couple of years ago, and of course, as with everything from like 2019 on, a lot of clinical research had to stop because of COVID. So we haven't seen a ton of stuff come out in the last couple of years, but that's kind of to be expected. The world was shut down. That said, they had pretty small numbers of participants, so they didn't have a huge number of power. That said, it's good to have those early trials. Basically, what the way you get money to do larger trials is for showing your effect on a small scale. It's kind of like a prototype. So they had small numbers, but they did see effects. They saw effects of, lower A1C, lower fasting blood glucose. A couple of studies actually measured blood lipids, so things like triglycerides and cholesterol and things like that, and they saw an improvement in those things too. All of that sounds great, right? But, and I feel like most of you kind of knew there was a but. The results that you saw are nowhere near pharmacologically relevant results. So we saw a decrease in A1C, we saw a decrease in fasting blood glucose, but it wasn't to a place where you would say that person has uncontrolled diabetes, so that person has controlled diabetes. They weren't to the extent of where that person has diabetes to that person no longer has diabetes. So the effects were there, but they were marginal. So I think that's a really important piece of the puzzle to kind of keep in mind, that it was there, but it definitely wasn't there to the extent to where taking apple cider vinegar would negate the need for a pharmacological agent. And to that point, it is unethical to do a research study, take somebody who is on metformin or Ozempic or like some other type of pharmacological agent to manage their diabetes. You can't take them off of it. That could be dangerous, right? So of the studies that there were different protocols. So there was only one that I found that they actually took people who were not on a pharmacological agent. And to me, that's kind of the most meaningful, because that way you're showing me that this apple cider vinegar is actually kind of, showing an effect. Whereas the rest of them, diabetes is a very complex disease. There's various stages of it. And kind of, the inclusion criteria for all of these studies was very different. So what that means is that whether or not people could have other conditions such as heart disease or kidney disease or things like that, whether or not they were taking medication already upon entry to the study, what their A1C was prior to entry to the study. So somebody can have an A1C of 6.5. That's a very different disease state than somebody has an A1C of 8. That's a very different disease state than somebody has an A1C of 12. All of the studies reported the average A1C, but from what I saw, there was no like restriction in what the A1C could be. So to me, that really muddles the results. because you have all of these other factors that are driving at it. It's still interesting that the addition of the apple cider vinegar and people who were previously not taking it, and in a lot of cases compared to a control group who took, a supplement that didn't have anything in it, they still saw an effect. But to me, that's kind of one of those, eh, it might be beneficial. Is it going to be the end all be all treatment for diabetes? Probably not. It's certainly nothing to me that says, that supplements the need or, negates the need for a pharmacological agent. It's an interesting effect, but does it really change my practice? No. What I would recommend is like, yeah, you can take it, but I don't really have a sound body of evidence at this particular moment in time to tell you that that is really going to be beneficial. I certainly don't have any grounds to stand on to be like, yeah, you should take apple cider vinegar and not worry about metformin. Mm-mm. No, ma'am. No, sir. No, 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 they. That's not anything I would ever recommend. The other big thing that apple cider vinegar has been kind of touted about is weight loss. Honestly, and that is interesting to me because there's a pretty significant amount of animal data, so rats and mice, where apple cider vinegar, again, in these very highly controlled environments, did show significant weight loss. From what I have found, it does not appear as though that really translates to human. I was only able to find one or two studies. And then one of those two studies, they did it in combination. So they had a control group, which didn't do anything different. They just monitored them. And then they had the intervention group, which did apple cider vinegar plus a calorie deficit. And like, yeah, their results were significant, but like, how do you know that there wasn't, like it wasn't just a calorie deficit that was creating the weight loss? So really not well designed studies, very early trials at best. And again, those early studies are important because, if you can show that there's an effect there, then it kind of gives you grounds to dig deeper and do more research with more people, more parameters, more controls, etc. That said, that research has not really been done yet. Certainly not in humans. And in the rat studies, yeah, it was promising, but we have really no data to hang our hat on that apple cider vinegar does anything to help weight in humans. Like I said, with a couple of the diabetes studies, they also measured blood lipids, which kind of prompted then, well, could this be helpful for management of high cholesterol and triglycerides and things like that? Again, those studies have really only been done in animals. They're very, very early in their studies. They're promising, but again, a lot of times it can be promising in an animal and then just be very, very not the same when we get to humans. So unfortunately, that one, the jury is really still out on that one. We really don't have any data to suggest that it helps regulate blood lipids in humans either. Probably the most promising is the idea of taking apple cider vinegar for digestive problems. Now, I want to be clear that digestive problems can mean a lot of things, right? But these have, largely it's things like constipation, diarrhea, and the most recently gastroparesis is actually one that's been studied pretty recently. Which, if you don't know what gastroparesis is, one, count your lucky stars because that means you don't have it. But two, gastroparesis is just kind of like this delayed emptying of the stomach. It's really, really uncomfortable. There's a lot of reasons that it can kind of flare up. A lot of them have to do with one, uncontrolled diabetes, but also kind of like psycho-emotional stress can really trigger it in some people. It's awful. Like you basically can't eat solid food or have a really hard time eating solid food. Often if you try to, you throw it back up. It's just a really difficult disease to manage. Again, really not a lot of data on that, just one or two studies, I'm sorry, looking at it in humans. 20 people, I think, were participants in the study, but it's encouraging. It's definitely worth taking a look at. and kind of investigating further. As for everything else, so things like, constipation, diarrhea, etc., there's actually decent evidence to support that it can help some of those conditions. Now, I will say that most of the studies that I looked at excluded things that are considered inflammatory bowel disorder, so that's things like Crohn's and colitis. um, it's not to say that it wouldn't help with Crohn's or colitis. It's more that those diseases are kind of more dangerous, and you can't really, again, kind of like the diabetes, like you can't take people off of medication that is, basically preventing their bowel from decaying inside their body, just to test and see if apple cider vinegar may work or not. So those two really haven't been studied. It's more, things like, constipation, diarrhea, to an extent IBS, but even IBS in and of itself is kind of an umbrella diagnosis that doesn't really mean anything. So it's kind of it, the data is very erratic. I will say that it's erratic. That said, it's somewhat promising. What they think happens. So, as I mentioned, apple cider vinegar is made by taking apple juice and adding bacteria to it, so that bacteria chew up the sugar essentially in the apple juice and create a vinegar. Um, that's basically a probiotic in the waiting, right? So if you've ever heard of things like kombucha or kefir, even yogurt, like that's how they do it. It's just with, either milk or different types of juice and stuff like that. So really it kind of makes sense, right? That if the probiotic properties of those types of foods help with digestive disorders, it makes sense that apple cider vinegar would as well, because it has the same probiotic qualities. That probiotic, if you've heard it kind of buzzwords in the media, it's called the mother. That's where if you take a bottle of apple cider vinegar and you look at the bottom of it, there's kind of like the sediment that kind of falls to the bottom. So that's the mother, right? That's the kind of bacterial culture that is present in the apple cider vinegar itself. Now, I want to be clear that all of the studies that I just mentioned, all of the, randomized controlled trials, if there are any, all of the human studies, all of the primary literature, peer-reviewed articles, all of them use actual apple cider vinegar. So people are drinking actual vinegar. The dose range differs, the number of times per day differs, so how much, how often, those are different across all studies. We have no consistent data right now to kind of point to what is even a standard dose of apple cider vinegar. But every single validated research study we have is using actual apple cider vinegar. So these are people who are drinking vinegar. We have not done any scientifically reviewed studies in humans or animals for that matter using supplements. So I want to make that super, super clear, because it matters. When we go back to what I was talking about how different research studies are conducted, and how different things are kind of, medications and things like that are approved to be brought to the market, is that they have to kind of make those kinds of, they have to clear those types of studies, and then the FDA kind of reviews the data and says, yes, this medication is effective, and yes, it is safe. So that's for things like medications. And then the FDA also controls like nutrition facts labels on food, so they have to, food companies, if they're processing something like making, even crackers or chips or anything like that, they have to claim, the nutrition facts label, which has, like your calories and nutrition information, but they also have to label it with the ingredients of what that includes. And that's because there's a potential health risk of, if somebody has an allergy and the food's not labeled, then of course they could, have a potential problem. Supplements are not regulated by the FDA. So they do not have to prove safety, and they do not have to prove efficacy. It is a weird loophole, but it is because they are not considered food, but they are also not considered medications. So they really are kind of in a no man's land that the FDA has no jurisdiction over them. So when, you look at, say, apple cider vinegar gummies, and they say that they are clinically proven to, improve blood sugar and lipids and help you lose weight and all of these things, one, that can be complete and utter horseshit. They could literally be making it up, and nobody is going to hold them accountable. So that's number one. A lot of supplement companies will do their own research studies. so that they can stay clinically proven and kind of sleep at night. But the research studies that they do typically have a very low number of participants, right? So that goes back to, okay, the lower number of participants, the less power you have to kind of stake your claim in. They also very rarely have a control group. So they take somebody, one person, they check their blood sugar. Before they give them apple cider vinegar, they give them apple cider vinegar for 3 weeks, and then they check their blood sugar again, and they say, "Oh, look, the apple cider vinegar lowered your blood sugar." You don't know that. You don't know that because you don't have a control group that took something that was different. And it could have just been a fluke. It could have been, who knows what. Fasting blood sugars in particular fluctuate all the time. And a lot of times the people in the studies work for the supplement company. So you tell me how valid that data really is. And again, they're not required to report it. Nobody is governing them. And again, we've done no clinically evaluated research with those supplements. We've only done clinically evaluated research with the actual apple cider vinegar. So I just want to be really clear on the distinction of that. Because I think it can be very easy for, you kind of have multiple problems, right? You have a misunderstanding maybe of the clinical data in and of itself. You have somebody who's a lay writer who doesn't have a background in medicine, reading a rat study and not really realizing that more than likely won't translate, or certainly won't translate to the same effect in humans. Well, then they write it for a news company that's blasted all over the internet. Everybody gets it in their head that, hey, apple cider vinegar is this new like wonder cure for everything. Supplement companies hear that BuzzFeed and they are like, well, let's make apple cider vinegar gummies. And like whether those apple cider vinegar gummies or even contain apple cider vinegar is questionable. But again, nobody's holding them accountable. So they maybe did a research study, or shoddy research study at best, but they maybe did a study, maybe they didn't. And now all of a sudden they're making millions off of it. I've also seen now recently, kind of with the upsurge in GI effects seen, and kind of most of those GI effects are pretty well, it's pretty universally accepted that the GI effects are likely due to that probiotic nature of the mother in apple cider vinegar. A lot of supplement companies are claiming to contain the mother. Now they might, but they might not. And the mother, like it's not like they're taking like actual apple cider vinegar and making like a gummy out of it. They're taking synthetic ingredients that make up apple cider vinegar and putting it into a gummy form. So they're basically just taking a probiotic that you would take in an over-the-counter supplement, and adding it into there. They're calling it a mother. You can't take apple cider vinegar and make it into a gummy. You might be able to put it into a capsule, but even that's kind of questionable. So just kind of, be mindful, right? We really don't know, are the apple cider vinegar supplements harmful? No, I'm sure they're not harmful unless there's something in them that you're allergic to. But are they really helpful? Probably not. Is apple cider vinegar in and of itself helpful? Yeah, there's some justification for that. And particularly with GI disorders and potentially diabetes management, although I would make the argument that with diabetes management, we really have more questions than answers at this point. So I think I would, yeah, again, it's not going to be harmful, but is it really going to be helpful? I think the jury is very much still out on that one. Oh, and kind of last little comment with GI disorders. I've heard a lot of people ask me about apple cider vinegar for heartburn release, or like, acid reflux type things. When I searched, I could not find a single research article about it. So again, might be another angle that supplement companies are taking to market it, but in human studies anyway, I have not seen a single research study done on apple cider vinegar, whether in any form, as a treatment for heartburn. So that could be an outright lie, or it could be just kind of a misinterpretation of some data. It's hard to say at this point. But so GI disorders, yes, maybe, but only if it's true apple cider vinegar. Diabetes, maybe, but I probably wouldn't recommend it yet at this point. Weight loss, lipids, pretty much reflux, anything like that, there's no data. There's animal data, but there's no human data. So I wouldn't waste your time or your money. So yeah, I hope that helps. And like I said, if you guys want more topics like this, if there's like kind of more questions or buzzwords that you hear about and you kind of just always wanted to know, like, what does a dietitian think about this? Leave me a comment. I would love to know. And like I said, I get these kinds of questions all the time. So it's very easy typically for me to kind of pull together a podcast episode for you all to basically answer all of your questions. And if this episode has brought up more questions about what one-on-one counseling could be like for you, please give us a shout. You leave us a comment, send us a DM, go to our website and check out all of our free resources and book a free discovery call. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever that looks like for you, and I will talk to you next week.